yesterday, well, today's Tuesday, so Saturday, we were speaking about what it means to protect women. And I was reading something you may know that Prabhupada said. He said, whenever the Bhagavatam, or whenever he speaks about women in relation to men, that women are Maya, or the women are the allurement, and so forth, he said that, well, it's not singling out women, because you can switch it around and say the same thing from the woman's perspective, that man is the allurement of Maya. Excuse me. Man is the allurement of Maya for woman. And so man is that, as you might say, woman personifies Maya for man, and you would say man personifies Maya for woman. He just said, we're not singling out women as a fault. He said you switch it around, that women will see men in the same way. So, as Chanaka Pandit, as we know, this idea that women are mother, that Prabhupada often quotes, it came from Chanaka Pandit, who says you should see every woman as mother. You should see others' property as garbage in the street. A learned man sees every woman as mother, sees others' property as garbage in the street. So he said, same way, the woman will see the husband as son. Oh. Oh yeah. I've been blessed with eternal service to Prabhupada because I sneezed. Amazing. The benefits of sneezing. So, Chanakya Pandit never said, to my knowledge, that every woman should see every man as son, but Prabhupada said that. But it was Chanakya Pandit who said we should see a man should see every woman as mother, except his wife. So if we keep that analogy also in the Bhagavatam, we find, we were talking last week about protection of women, how men should protect women from being exploited by other men particularly. We talked about car salesmen and car mechanics, that women need protection from car mechanics because they're out to get you. And they've done surveys about the prices of cars. So you go to the same dealership, depending who you are, you'll get a different price. You'll be able to buy the car for a different price. If you're black, you'll end up paying much more. If you're a woman, you'll pay more than you are if a man. I think it's based on consideration that these people or groups can be taken advantage of more easily than a white male, perhaps. So we have to protect women from car salesmen. And you'll go to the car mechanic and he'll say, you need this done, you need that done, you need this done, that done. I once went to a car mechanic. We were on the road and we were having a problem with our car. And he said, you have to have a valve job done, which was $700. So we thought, well, let's take it to a second mechanic for a second opinion. And then he said that the wires that go to the spark plugs, distributor cap, he said they're loose. I think he had to replace the distributor cap, and it was like $20 for the whole job. So these things are going on. We need to protect our women from car mechanics. But of course, the real thing which we discussed was that women are protected from men who would exploit them sexually and make them some kind of sexual slaves, subtly or grossly. I mean, it happens grossly in terms of prostitution, but also subtly in terms of boyfriend, girlfriend, where women often surrender to these men and become sexual slaves. As I once mentioned a very funny story, and I'll mention it again in case some of you didn't hear it. There's a talk show in America, and the talk show host is a psychologist, so people call up with their problems, and most most of the people are calling about relationship problems, and mostly relationships with boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband and wife, not so much mother, father. So in America, relationship problems with parents aren't such a problem because when you're 18, you just move out and get away from it. Then you don't have to deal with it anymore. So mostly the problems are the boyfriend, girlfriend. And this talk show host she's Jewish, but from what I can tell, she's fairly religious, and she's probably in her late 60s now. So that generation was not so liberal in general. So this one woman called, young woman, about a problem she was having in a relationship. And the basic problem was that she had a boyfriend, and they've been seeing one another for so many years, and he wasn't committed to the relationship in the sense that she wanted to get married and he wouldn't commit. And that's pretty typical of men. Men tend to be a little more independent and often less committal because they know once they get married, they're getting tied down. All their freedoms, not all their freedoms, but they think that way, that all their freedoms will be taken away from them. And generally men don't think about marriage and settling down as early on in life as women do. Women think about it much earlier. And often men don't think about it or don't want it even until they're in their 30s or early 40s. So this was her complaint and her question, well, what should I do? And then I think her name is Dr. Laura. You can probably Google Dr. Laura. She's quite interesting. The advice she gives, it's actually very much in line, most of the advice she gives is very much in line with Krishna consciousness. So she said, are you having sex with him? Or the girl had already mentioned, we have this relationship, we're having sex, but he doesn't want to marry me. So then Dr. Laura said, well, how much are you charging him for sex? To which the girl was taken aback, caught off guard, like he's your boyfriend, you don't charge your boyfriend. And so the girl said, what? I said, how much are you charging him? And the girl said, well, I'm not charging him. He said, well, you should be. And she said, why? He said, well, if he doesn't want to marry you and you're having sex with him, then you're just a prostitute, so at least get paid for it. Interesting reply, isn't it? From her perspective, coming from her generation, if you're having sex with a man, well, ideally you wouldn't have sex until you're married, but if you're with a man in a relationship and he's not committed, then that means you're a prostitute. And I can confirm that with something that Prabhupada said. And Prabhupada was being interviewed once, and was interviewed by a woman reporter. So she was asking about women's liberation and this and that. And Prabhupada, he said women should be protected. And the woman said, well, what if you want to live independent of a man? You don't want that protection. And Prabhupada said, no, it's natural that you should be protected. And then she said something along the lines of, but that's, isn't that patriarchal, or isn't that, your view? She said, isn't that discrimination? And Prabhupada said, no. He said, nature naturally discriminates. It's not my discrimination. Nature naturally discriminates. It's woman's nature to want to be taken care of. And I think, as we said last week, when a woman has a child, she can't take care of herself. At certain stages of pregnancy, when she has a child, that's why women get maternity leaves. They have to take care of a kid. They need somebody else there. So, Prabhupada didn't come out and say, well, look if a woman's not protected. I mean, basically he was saying, then you'll just have sex with this man and that man. So he didn't come out and say, really, you're a prostitute. He was a little more polite, you could say, than Dr. Laura in that sense. But after the conversation, then Prabhupada said, well, a woman who's not protected by her husband, without a husband or protected by her father or son, she's a prostitute because she ends up prostituting herself to different boyfriends. So when we talk about men protecting women, that's the main area. What is the father protecting the daughter from? From all these young men who would love to enjoy their beautiful daughter without being committed to him. So there's a principle that every woman should understand who's not married, that you should not have a relationship with any man unless it's a serious relationship with a potential for marriage. Otherwise, if this man doesn't have the potential to be a husband and father, then you have nothing to do with him in terms of an intimate relationship. It's just, you don't have it. That's the way society has generally been up till the mid-1960s, with some exceptions in history, but generally that's the way people understood male-female relationships, that the relationship is there within marriage to raise a family. Now, interesting thing is, if you flip it around, as I was saying, if we flip things around, if the woman is Maya for the man, then the man is Maya for the woman. So how does this protection thing go? Well, in the Bhagavatam, it says woman represents the good intelligence of a man. So woman also protects the man. In theory, of course, it's Kali Yuga, so things are not the way they should be, but in theory, the man is protected by the woman because a married man is, his wife is there. And so I was telling Kush yesterday that if there's a person interested in you, but you're not interested in them, and they don't understand you're not interested in them, and like in her case, a man is interested in her, she's not interested. So I said, well, when you're with a man, just talk about your boyfriend, and then he'll get the message. I have a friend, he said that he's a devotee, but he said at work the women are tend to be a little bit promiscuous, and he said he always talks about his wife, and that just sobers everything. So, the wife is protection for the man. If the man cheats on his wife, he has to deal with his wife. So she's actually there to protect him from the other women. So from what we're learning from Shastra, everyone needs protection. Now, if one is Naishtiki Brahmachari, one is sannyasi, their protection is totally coming from their Krishna consciousness. It's totally coming from Krishna, from being transcendental. They're protected from the modes of nature. So their protection is coming from Guru. They can take total shelter of Guru. By his mercy, they're completely protected. And it doesn't mean that men and that women and married men do not get the same protection. But what it appears that Shastra is saying, that most people need a little more immediate protection from the forces of Maya, particularly the sexual forces of Maya, in terms of male protection or female protection. So we don't, oftentimes, you look at the Bhagavatam and it says, well, the female is kind of like the enemy. But there in the Bhagavatam, I believe, 4th canto, talks about the woman as the intelligence of man, as the one who's protecting man. So that's the idea. There's also that idea of women protect men, not just men protect women. So they work together. It's a different kind of protection, but it's more subtle and more psychological for the man in terms of, here's my wife, and this is the person that I'm obliged to in my relationship, so there's no question of relationship with any other woman. So there's protection there. In theory, of course, men do cheat because it's Kali Yuga, and then in that part of the Bhagavatam, then Prabhupada says that that a good wife, a man will always appreciate a good wife. Then another thing that's interesting, and it talks about in the Shastra, that the duty of grihastas is to perform yajna. And yajnas had to be performed, there's certain yajnas that were traditionally performed in household life for purification, and the wife had to be there. The yajna couldn't be performed without the wife there. And after Sita was banished by Lord Ram, he had made a golden deity or golden statue of her because he needed her there to do the yagyas, because he couldn't do them alone. He had to do them with his wife. So that's why he had that deity of her. So she would be present in the deity to do the yagyas. Isn't that interesting? So it's nice if we understand the holistic position of Grihastha life and how the man is protection for the woman is protection for the man. Because then we see it more in a positive light. Because there are a lot of negatives that are discussed in Scripture about male-female attraction and about the entanglement of household life. So that was a first thought in today's class of the value of women in protecting men. Why does a woman have to be there? As far as I understand, the woman is considered the man's better half, and so the whole has to be there to do the yajna because they're a team, a family, and so the particular yajnas they're doing require the wife there to make it whole. So wife is the better half. And so, it's said that, a man accepts a wife to perform religious functions. So she's there doing, there for the yajnas. In today's life, it's more like the woman, generally the women, not always, but generally they take care of the deities at home. So they'll keep that part of the home together, and a nice altar, deities and so forth. There's some men that are really into deity worship, but generally it'll be the women. So, the woman's position in the home is really to maintain religion and then to pass that on to the children. And so, in a lot of homes, women will worship the deity, they'll train the children in doing the deity worship. No, in many traditional families, all the children are trained to do deity worship. But at least we have that idea today. The man is busy, he's working, the wife is there. She takes care of the religious activities. So it's a teamwork. That's my understanding. So the position of women in Vedic society and the position of women in today's society is quite different. But as we're saying, even Dr. Laura, she understood the position of women, and she's in her late 60s. So that means her understanding of women as wives is not objects to be exploited. That came from her upbringing and her Jewish background. And that means that's, as my point was, that's how people have been thinking. Only until recent times people understood. And it's quite common sense. So, and now, of course, today people will think it's very conservative. And people don't understand the utilization of the male-female relationship, the utilization of sex. Because it's Kali Yuga, so in Kali Yuga everything is about enjoyment, it's not about duty. So everyone sees things through the lens of enjoyment. And that's why something as simple as sex is for procreation, people don't understand that. And so how can you say that? Or that's so difficult? And they have a million arguments. But you have to do something artificial, generally, or awkward or unnatural, to prevent pregnancy. So isn't it kind of obvious that that's the byproduct of it? You say, but it's enjoyable. So Krishna made it enjoyable. If it wasn't enjoyable, no one would do it. And the whole species, there would be no species propagated, but people have to come into the material world to fulfill their karma, so Krishna makes it enjoyable. If eating were not enjoyable, nobody would eat. It would be austere, or we wouldn't eat enough, or we wouldn't eat the right foods. So just because eating is enjoyable, it doesn't mean that you just eat candy bars, because candy bars are more enjoyable than lettuce or spinach, right? Or sprouts, or carrot juice, right? So does that mean you just drink 7-Up and eat candy bars because eating's enjoyable? No, everybody understands you eat to nourish your body, right? But because the desire to enjoy sex is so strong, they can't understand its function, its purpose, and because it controls people psychologically to such a degree that it's made them crazy, they can't understand. Now, in societies that are sober, they understand that the sexual attraction is so intense, it's so strong, that you have to put barriers around it, otherwise it'll just go crazy. You won't be able to control it, because it's like you have bulls in heat and they're ready to attack. So you have these bulls, you put the bulls to work, you work them so they can burn off that energy, or you tie them up so they don't impregnate every cow they see. So in the same way, human society puts restrictions on how males and females think about one another, how they associate and so forth, how women are protected. All these things are there to keep things sanctified and keep things purified. And you can see in modern society, by what's happening, is when you don't put up these barriers, then you get all kinds of divorce, you get all kinds of unwanted pregnancies and all kinds of abortions. And somehow the people are not smart enough to put this all together, so they still insist on unrestricted sexual enjoyment, and they think if you restrict it, you're just backwards. And so young people are growing up like this, and they're not understanding that sex is for children within marriage. So therefore, because they don't understand it, that means now our women are not protected. It's like society has taken down all the protective barriers, and now the parents that understand that, which is usually in the West, it's usually the Christian parents, because they have these, or religious parents of any tradition, they understand these things. But society is operating completely contrary to these ideals, so it's really a struggle nowadays for parents, because you have girls and boys growing up, even if they grow up in religious communities, the values of society influence, they come in, and so even boys and girls raised in religious communities, many of them don't understand, well, what's wrong? We're just hanging out with the boys and there's nothing wrong. I told that story once. It was a really funny story, I'll tell it again. These two young boys were watching a movie, and their father walked into the wherever they were watching the movie, in the living room, the lounge, as you say, or the den. I don't know if you have dens in South Africa. Den is like another room, where the living room's more formal, where you invite guests. Normally you don't use it except for guests, and the den is where everybody hangs out, and that's where the TV is. So he walks through. These are young boys, young teenagers, and he sees a sexual scene in the movie. And he objects to it and said, "What are you watching?" Like basically saying, "Why are you watching this? This is inappropriate for you." And they said, "Oh, don't worry, there's not much of this." So he wanted to teach them a lesson. Wanted to teach them a lesson. So the mother wasn't home, but whenever the boys would sit at home and watch television, the mother would make them brownies. So the father made them brownies, and he gave it to them while they were watching the movie. And the boys ate the brownies, and they said, "These brownies, there's something in them." It was like, doesn't taste right. It's kind of smelly and sickening taste. They don't taste like mother's. What did you do? And he said, oh, well, I just went in the backyard and got some dog poop. And I mixed it in the brownies. But I didn't put in that much. Interesting, huh? Well, there's not that much sex in the movie. Oh, okay, it's not a problem. Yeah. Well, there's not that much dog stool in the brownies, so I guess it shouldn't be a problem, right? Nice lesson, huh? So, his point is that in society today we think, well, there's just, a little bit of this or a little bit of that, which in previous times was considered totally taboo, which now is just considered ordinary, and nobody thinks it's a problem. But actually it's a huge problem. And at least I'm finding it's a problem in raising children who want to be devotees. When they're exposed to all of this, it's just, to them, when you take something which is sinful, and in the eyes of young people, it's normal, they can't understand there's anything wrong with it, because nobody thinks there's anything wrong with it except their parents or their fanatical religion. And then you have this problem communicating that, no, this is wrong. And we have a problem with our children, and we have a problem with our devotees sometimes, because our devotees were also raised like this. So, these standards that we have in Krishna consciousness seem sometimes overly strict. But the point is, in traditional societies up to maybe 40, 50 years ago, man and woman associating together meant they were going to get married. Man and woman having sex together meant they were married and they were going to have children. It doesn't mean that now. Right? It means now, man and woman associating together may have no interest in becoming married. And if the woman becomes pregnant, then the man will just say, we'll just get an abortion. He won't say, oh, now that you're pregnant, I should commit to you. I mean, so often they will say no. Say, well, I just wanted to enjoy you, but I didn't want to commit to you. So now, what does that make her? She thinks he loves me. But what does that make her? That makes her the prostitute. So she's prostituting. So every time a woman has sex with a man she's not married to, she's prostituting. Every time a woman has an intimate relationship with a man who's not committed to a long-haul, long-term relationship, she's prostituting. Subtly, even if she's not having sex, still she's prostituting. Of course, you might say, well, I don't know if he's going to have a long-term relationship until I spend time with him. Okay, that's fine, but you don't have sex. And if he won't hang out with you because you won't have sex, perfect. Perfect. You never want to see that guy again. And that's how you test men. You don't give it to them. And if they're happy not to get it, then he's a good man. Now, if you look at the Christian religion, and you look at those who are very devout in their religion, they all talk about celibacy, continence, chastity before marriage. Beautiful, you see these beautiful women, these beautiful guys, and they're religious people, they may be pastors or just very religious, and they're talking about their commitment to celibacy. So it's a traditional religious value. Why do the Muslim women cover themselves? Because their fathers will say, or their husbands will say, these are our precious jewels, our women, and we don't expose them to the world. They're not there for all the men in the world to see and enjoy. So of course now things are different, because women want to show off their stuff. I think that's what it's all about. Show off your stuff. But in traditional societies, women did not show off their stuff. So everything is upside down. And so women strut around showing off their stuff, and then they complain about how lusty men are. And ladies, add 2 and 2 together and you'll see. And say, well, we just want to look attractive, okay. There's a difference between looking beautiful and looking sexy. And nowadays everything's about looking sexy. You got to be sexy. You're not sexy, then you might as well just stay home, become a spinster or something. No. Women should look beautiful, and when women are dressed appropriately and they look beautiful, they don't sexually agitate men. It causes men to respect them, but when women don't present themselves respectfully, then it causes men to look at them disrespectfully. Right? It's kind of simple. So, as I was saying in the last class, I was saying that in America in the early 1900s, and before that, women covered themselves. So whenever, we talk about liberation and freedom from moral restriction, it always turns out that women want to uncover themselves. And so nowadays, you have these events where all the actors and actresses come, and everybody's looking at what they wear and how much of their body they expose, and this is all symptom. And I see it because on my internet, when I go to get my email, all this stuff comes up. And that's how I know. So there's a fascination in our modern society with looking at women's bodies and that women exposing as much of their bodies as they can get away with legally. Just the opposite of a traditional society where nothing's exposed, it's all covered, or as much of it is covered as possible in any respectable society. Of course, you might say, well, look at tribal societies. They didn't cover themselves. That's another discussion. But you understand what I'm saying. Even if they didn't cover themselves, that wasn't considered provocative. In some societies, women didn't wear shirts, but that was not considered sexual. That was just how it was. But so you understand the principle that woman, we say men should respect woman, and then so what should woman do? Then woman should behave respectfully, and that helps men respect them. And if women behave like sexual objects, then men will see them like sexual objects. And if women behave like mothers and respectable ladies, generally that's how men will deal with them. So this is an important principle for women to understand. So now Krush says, you have to do the samskars to have nice children who won't be attracted to any of that. Yeah. They say it's nature and nurture, so you start out as best you can. You do the samskars to attract nice children. But then you have to insulate the children as far as possible because, see, the thing is, what we're finding is that you can take a child and put him in an ideal environment, which is very, very pure, like you can have a very pure school environment, like we have so many gurukulas. But children, they'll all, and we as adults also, particularly in Kali Yuga, because what predominates in Kali Yuga is the mode of ignorance, and a little bit of passion, but mode of ignorance. What predominated in Satya Yuga was mode of goodness. So, for example, in Satya Yuga, if you allow society's influence to affect you and your family and your children, you're all being affected by goodness, so it's not a problem. But today, ignorance is predominant, so therefore you'll see wherever people are exposed to ignorance, they tend to get pulled down. So you may be in goodness, and your training may be in goodness, but wherever ignorance is, that lowest common denominator is where people tend to end up. So what we see with our children is that more often it's the children who are more exposed to social influences through movies, through social media and so forth. They're putting that stuff in their head and their mind through music. They'll influence the children who are more pure rather than the children who are more pure influencing the children who are lower. It's because it's Kali Yuga, so that those lower modes just predominate. So it's a problem. and you have to protect children from that, those influences. And the influences are real, and they do affect them. So, in your home and in your schools, it has to be very, very pure, so that it's so pure that those things will not be attractive to them. But we're finding even in Mayapur with the children, because of the internet, because of social media, there's so much external influence going into kids' brains through movies, through music, and it's all passed around through Facebook, YouTube, this and that. So, Kali is getting in there everywhere, and we're easily affected by it, especially children are affected by it. So, if you ask all the right questions, you can know in 3 months if you have a long-term relationship, yeah. So Kush is going to make up a list of all the right questions for us, okay? Even in some tribal cultures, the men and women live separate. Separate meaning they lived in separate rooms. Yeah, no. There's, what does Prabhupada say about Grihastha life? He said, and what does he say about male-female attraction? He said that ultimately you have to become free from that to become pure. And he said, I was reading last week, he said that you're advancing by how much you're becoming free from gross sexual desire. Because as you become Krishna conscious, you become free from that. So, the goal of Grihastha life is not material enjoyment, but it's not impersonalism where you have no relationship, but it's to have a relationship that works together to help one another, excuse me, to help one another ultimately become detached from one another. As weird as that sounds. I know that sounds weird. We're helping one another become detached from one another. Well, let's put it another way. You're helping one another become detached materially. And when you're detached materially, you'll be detached from one another. At least you'll be detached materially from one another. It's not that you don't care about one another, and it's not that you don't see one another as devotees. But that's the ultimate end of Grihastha life, because if you look at Vedic culture and you look at our philosophy, it's trying to free us from material entanglement, and it's teaching us that sexual attraction is the center of material entanglement. So Grihastha life must therefore detach us from that sexual attachment. And as we're discussing, that everything, if you look at Vedic society, everything which is done in Vedic society is ultimately to protect men and women from falling into deep sexual attachments. The society is organized that way, and even Grihastha life is organized that way. As Prabhupada said, in his family,